Before we dive into this episode, I want to take a second to speak about our sponsor, Pith and Stem, who we are thrilled to have on this journey with us. As someone who is always looking for ways to improve my healthy hustle, Pith and Stem's drop-top desk stood out to me as the best full work-from-home solution on the market. The world of work from home is changing, and a laptop or screen perched on your lap or dining room table isn't enough anymore. It's imperative that we have a solution at home that matches our productivity station that we can have in our office. But of course, homes weren't made to be worked in, and not all of us want a dedicated study. That's why I'm so happy that Pith and Stem created this perfect solution. They designed this desk with both the needs of the professional and their home in mind. It's perfect because it allows me to have a full productivity station that suits my needs and helps me get the most out of every minute that I spend at it, not only so I work comfortably, but that I actually enjoy it. And the best thing about Drop-Top, I can close and lock it at the end of the day to keep work and home separate. And it looks awesome on the wall. You can get your Drop-Top desk anywhere in the world from pithandstem.com or just Google Drop-Top and you'll find it pretty quickly.
Thank you so much for listening and watching these episodes. It feels like you're really part of the journey with us. And can I ask you one favor to help us grow even further? You may have noticed that we've been getting some amazing guests on. We've got more listeners than ever. But you can help us continue to give value to you by clicking that subscribe or follow button below. It helps us to show everyone else how well we're doing and therefore give you more value by getting bigger guests and take the podcast on the road. It takes you 2 seconds and it's completely free and it helps us more than you know. Thank you.
Chris, you've built 3 multi-7-figure businesses, but it didn't always start with sunshine. What did success cost you the first time around?
So I burned out twice. The first time in 2009 and then more recently in 2021. And the first one was a pretty easy burnout to recover from. It was mostly physical. So I was really tired and just kind of basically exhausted, right? However, it did have a little bit of it crept up on me again a couple of years later because I ended up having to have back surgery from the first burnout, sitting in that chair for 15 hours a day, building my business, right? So I guess you can say it cost me a little bit of back health. The surgery worked, I'm fine and all that sort of good stuff there. The 2021 burnout was a different kind of burnout though, because it hit me up here a lot more than I expected it would do. And it also, from a clinical perspective, I was diagnosed with phase 3 adrenal failure as well. So there was that sort of longer recovery process needed compared to the first one where it was like, you need to take some time out, hit the time out button a little bit and just relax for a bit, which is what I did. This time around, I didn't get into it overnight and I wasn't going to get out of it overnight. So it took me a good while to get over it.
And what do you think it was that made you want to do those 15-hour days? Like, what were you trying to build for? What was your long-term vision at that time?
I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Money, plain simple. I was chasing it down. You know, I had very much bought into the whole hustle culture, right? I later became buddies with Gary Vaynerchuk, who was always about hustle, 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 and all the rest of it. And he and I actually talked on a number of occasions about that and what it was like and what hustle meant and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, that was where it came down. That's what it came down to. It came down to wanting to build a super successful business, make a ton of money, grow as quickly as I possibly could, hire as many people as possible, and serve as many amazing clients as I could serve in the shortest amount of time possible. Were I to have spaced that out a little bit more, I probably wouldn't have burnt out, but I was going for it, man. I mean, it was on, you know? Yeah.
Well, I think it's really interesting. So when I first started my business, we set up a newsletter called The Healthy Hustle, because like I mentioned to you before we started recording, there were so many people around us that were doing or achieving what I wanted to achieve, but they were just burning out, or what I thought was burning out. You know, they're just working super hard, becoming really tired, which I don't think necessarily is burnout, right? There's different levels of stress, tiredness, and ultimately burnout. And it's something that I was just really terrified of. So I'm interested to hear from you how your view or your perception of success has changed after each of the burnouts. That there must have been a change after the first one, but perhaps not strong enough to stop it from happening again.
Yeah, so very different burnouts as well. Important to talk about that. So the first one, like I said, was just pure exhaustion. I was just going 100 miles an hour for realistically probably about 3 years. We were building the business. We had just hit about 150 employees.
Wow, okay.
I was building an outsourced call center over in the Philippines, which is where I was based. We had about 150 employees. We just had our first $1 million year. Everything looked great on the outside looking in. But obviously I was a wreck, right? I was doing those 15, 16-hour days, all the rest of it. Another thing that was, I believe, a big contributor to that as well was that because of the time zone differences between the Philippines and the US, because most of our clients were US-based, I was working through the night, which meant I wasn't really sleeping that great during the day either. So it was kind of all those kind of things mixed together. We did a couple of things on the back end of that initial burnout in 2010. 2010 was really the year that I became what I called a virtual CEO. So this was my chance to be able to continue to run the business, but to do it at an arm's length and not have to be in the premises every single day. And we did a great job. We actually hired 8 people in 1 year to replace me. So it goes to show you, because we were kind of like building things from the ground up and really bootstrapping. Like I didn't owe $1 to anybody. Took no loans, we're talking proper bootstrap business here. And the pressure was on, right? And that was why we worked. But by the end of 2010, I'd replaced myself ultimately in the business day to day. I was still involved, obviously, but I wasn't going to the office every day. I was conversing with my COO at the time, who was an American guy that I brought in to kind of run the business day to day and all the rest of it. And so that first burnout was relatively easy to bounce back from because I knew what the problem was. The problem was me. I was micromanaging everything. I believed that I had to be, at the helm of every department. And, I was hiring people. I was training people. I was doing the sales. I was the IT guy. I remember actually, this is a ridiculous story to tell, but one day I was walking around in our server room, which was probably about half the size of this studio right here. And you got all the cables and the flashing lights and all the rest of it. And I remember walking around thinking to myself, I have absolutely no idea what any of this stuff means. Why am I walking around in here acting as if I know what any of this is? This is stupid. This is a waste of my time. It's stupid, above and beyond everything else. So we hired an IT director to come in, and it was just one of those things. So first one, relatively easy to bounce back from. The second one really shifted my mindset in regards to what success meant. Because if you're running a business to the point where you do burn out, that's not a successful business. That's not a successful business at all. And so the second time round, I had to almost kind of relearn what self-care meant for me personally, quite selfishly. And I realized though, after I kind of like recovered initially from it, I'm not completely over the hill either, by the way, because adrenal failure like that, you don't get into that overnight and you don't get out of it overnight either. It takes years to get to the phase 3 where I was. Therefore, it will take years to get back to where I should be, right? I'm much, much, much better. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not quite out of the weeds yet, but I'm getting there. But that was the big shift. It was like, you know what? Self-care is not selfish as an entrepreneur. Self-care, actually, if you tweak your mindset on it, self-care is a strategy. Like, this is the best strategy we can have as an entrepreneur, regardless of how much money you're making or what industry you're in. If you switch that mindset of, oh, I've got to go to the gym to exercise, or I've got to take my supplements, or I've got to go for my monthly massage. No, you get to have your massage. You get to go to the gym. Yeah. You get to take your supplements, right? And so that was kind of like the big mindset shift was actually success. Yes, money's important, but it ain't everything. And I'd rather be around for, X amount of years longer and make that money over that period of time rather than make it very quickly and then burn out and fizzle out.
I completely agree. There's so many things in there that I think are so important to talk about. So, for example, we've been in London this week, and some people don't understand the whole Whoop thing that we've just touched on before we started recording. They don't understand why you'd want so much data on how your body is performing. And the way I've been describing it is that if I burn out or if I'm not feeling well, people's salaries won't get paid if it goes on for too long. Like it's a cog in the business that we have to look after is the people at the top who are running it. And it's the same in so many places in businesses. But people don't quite understand that when they're employees, perhaps, or when they're part of a bigger machine, because it doesn't really matter as much if their sleep wasn't great or whatever, they drank too much.
I was on the train coming here, and I saw a guy literally catching flies out cold on the train. There was a lady sitting next to him who was on her laptop putting together a slide deck at what? It would have been 7:30 in the morning. There was another guy that was tapping away on a keyboard. You know, our work-life balance has shifted so much. By the way, work-life balance is a myth. I don't believe it exists, particularly for entrepreneurs, because your work life will always come into your personal life and vice versa, particularly when you're running your own business, right? So there is no balance. It's just a matter of priority. But what's happened over the last 30 years or so, because of technology above and beyond everything else, we've got to the point where when we left our jobs at 5 p.m., we did genuinely unplug and disconnect. We would do our commute home. We'd get home, we'd make ourselves dinner, we'd flop in front of the TV or read a book or listen to music or converse with friends or whatever it was. Now, people are on the train, on their commute. They are replying to emails on their smart devices, or they're consuming meeting notes, or they're putting together bloody slide decks, you know, on like 7:30 in the morning. You know, so our 9 to 5, and I was just talking to my daughter about this as we were coming up on the train. Our 9 to 5 has gone from like being 9 to 5 to more like 7 to like 9, right?
Time.
Which means that your brain's not switching off, which means your recovery is not there. And if you're not recovering and you're not, you know, recalibrating, particularly from a mental bandwidth perspective, what good are you going to be the next day and the next day and the next day?
Yeah.
And so I'm really in tune with that now. And I'm like, I'm all in on that. And knowing that recovery actually plays a major, major part. And the Whoop, hashtag not sponsored, we should say, you should go after them for a sponsorship.
I should.
But, you know, the Whoop or any other kind of wearable device, when you see how your sleep patterns are, what your, you know, your habits are, you know, are you taking those supplements? Are you eating late? Are you, you know, getting out and seeing sunshine first thing in the morning, et cetera, et cetera? All these things do take, you know, a toll on you, or they can actually add to your recovery and your overall health. And I think it's really important to, you know, the numbers never lie. The data is what it is. It's black and white. So more fool you if you have it and you don't look at it, you know?
100%. And to your point on how long the workday's become, I went and got a routine eye test recently, and the lady was like, how many hours a day do you look at screens? And I just said 5. I was like, well, that's probably 5 hours a day, because I'm probably thinking about myself when I'm 20 rather than 30.
Right.
In reality, it's probably 15 hours, isn't it? From your phone to your computer to whatever. It's so much time. So we're not looking at the data of what's going to even hurt us in the future. We don't know what blue light's going to do to us in 50 years' time. We've got no idea. I'm interested to hear your definition of burnout, because there's such a buzzword that people listening will be like, oh, I've burnt out. And what they mean is they're tired. And so I'm interested in someone who's been through it and is now, you know, a sort of an expert in the topic. What does it mean to you? How would you define it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm kind of on a bit of a mission now to try and eradicate very specifically entrepreneurial burnout as much as I possibly can. Leading the charge a little bit, I guess, is a nice way of looking at it. Burnout is very different for a lot of different people, right? Like you can just be acutely tired and worn out, and a couple of weeks off will fix it. That's a minor burnout in my mind, right? But then you can go a lot further down, chronic fatigue syndrome, you know, adrenal failure, all these other things. That's a much deeper burnout. I was also diagnosed with depression and anxiety in 2021 as part of that burnout. And so if you'd have asked me 5-6 years ago whether I'd be put on an antidepressant for almost 18 months, I would have called you mad, absolutely bonkers, because I'm one of the most positive, upbeat guys you'll ever meet, right? So for me to get to that point mentally where I needed medicine, and I knew it was only masking the symptoms, it wasn't curing it, so I took myself off them earlier than I probably should have clinically, if you were talking to a doctor. But I knew that I needed to treat what the issue was rather than just try and swallow pills every day, right? So I think burnout is ultimately a warning. That's what it really is. What it definitely is not is a badge of honor. And that is where society has led us to kind of almost embrace that hustle and grind mentality. And it's all about the hustle, baby. You got to hustle harder and hustle mode switch on, T-shirts and all that kind of stuff. I call a massive amount of BS on that. I really do. And you can build a business successfully without burning out, without working 16 hours a day. You can build a business that does genuinely support the lifestyle that you want to enjoy and live. And it doesn't have to become a chore. It doesn't have to become something that you kind of almost look at with a certain amount of hatred or dissatisfaction attached to it. Like, if the day comes where you don't enjoy what you do as an entrepreneur, that's a major wake-up call for you. You ignore that wake-up call at your own peril, as far as I'm concerned. I've been doing this a long time now. Like, I often joke to say I've got no hair left because of it, but it's probably down to the 4 children, really, more than anything. But I'm 22 years of entrepreneurship, pretty much. And so I know what it looks like and I know what it feels like. And if you're filled, if you see something pop up on your schedule and you're filled with a sense of doom or dread or hatred or just tiredness attached to that client call popping up or that meeting, that group call popping up, there's something broken. You need to look at how to fix that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of your content and stuff you say is so interesting because you've become a champion of this way of working, which is for the long term. It's for longevity. I mean, the longevity leader is sat, or the long haul leader, sorry, is sat in front of us. You've got the youpreneur.
The longevity leader is going to be the follow-up, actually.
The follow-up, yeah, there you go. I'll send you an invoice.
Yeah.
But what I'm interested in is to take you back to the call center, maybe, which is to ask you about the time when you realized that you should go from an operator to the brand of the business or the face of the business, and then start this journey into how you can add the most value to businesses in general.
Yeah. So what had been happening was I'd been building the business for about 4 or 5 years. And then in 2010, I went to a conference in Vegas. It was called Blog World. It's no longer about now. Because blogging is kind of no longer about either. But it was ultimately sort of like an early stage content marketing type of conference. And the only reason I went was because I had clients in San Francisco at the time. And I was like, I'm going all the way to San Francisco. It's quite a long trip from the Philippines, very much a long haul trip, right? And so what else can I do on the West Coast in the US when I'm out there? Oh, there's this conference. Oh, it's kind of about marketing and things like that. Let's go check it out. So I went ahead and I kind of went along to this thing, not really knowing what to expect. But I was like, hey, I know a few things about the outsourcing industry. I could blog, this could be interesting. And a month later, I started blogging. I think 3 or 4 months later, I started podcasting.
Nice.
So this is a long time ago. Somebody actually called me a podcasting veteran the other day, which I thought was quite amusing. But yeah, so April 2010, I started podcasting. And what I realized pretty early on was that I could share my experience in those 2 formats. And I played around with YouTube a little bit, but ultimately it was blogging and podcasting. I could share my experience, my expertise, my story, my opinions, my thoughts, etc., to the world, ultimately, really easily. Didn't cost me all that much money at all. And by the end of that first year, I'd amassed 5,000 email subscribers, which in those days is kind of today's equivalent to having probably 25, 30,000. It was quite a lot in those days. All organic, no paid ads or anything like that. And, we're talking open rates of like 70. 80%.
Oh, nice.
Back in the day, 70, 80% open rates was kind of like,
Oh, they're opening.
So because people opted in because they liked you, they liked your opinions, they liked they liked your vibe, right? I used to say all the time, like, your vibe attracts your tribe. And so that was exactly what was happening. And so through creating that content and growing that online following, I then actually ended up opening another business, which was a company called Virtual Staff Finder, which got acquired last year by WorkPod, which is an Aussie-based business based in the Philippines as well. Got a big facility over there. Amazing company. So they bought Virtual Staff Finder last year. But over the course of that kind of 5 or 6 years of building that online brand and everything online, I realized actually I've become the face. I've become the face of this industry. And so my first book, Virtual Freedom, came about. A publisher reached out and said, would you write a book? Sure. And so the personal brand of Chris was being born slowly but surely. Fast forward a few more years, we opened the doors to Youpreneur, which was at the time our community for expert-based entrepreneurs and expert kind of business owners, creators, that kind of thing. We've now morphed into serving more of a business author network and community. But ultimately, it became pretty bloody apparent that people wanted to do business with me first before, at that point, my two companies. And so it was just a natural progression, I think. And people do want to do business with other people. I believe, I don't think people really want to do business with logos or brands so much. I mean, yes, from a B2P perspective, I get that. Big art, big advertisers, sponsors, that kind of thing. But ultimately, people want to do business with other people. And that's where my P2P or people-to-people philosophy was born.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's well documented now that people want to work with people, but there's so many reasons why. And I just think one of them is that you can't really hide as a person. This is why I've said this week a few times. This is why I love podcasting and meeting people and long form stuff, because you can't hide. Like if you come up on Instagram or TikTok as a cool person with great videos, but in real life you're horrible, you can hide that in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
But on a long form or when you meet someone, you can't. And therefore, I think the shift towards sort of long form content and a lot of the stuff you're talking about, which is optimizing for the long term, is becoming the shortcut everyone's looking for.
Yes.
Because everyone's doing the short form, we should be looking at the long term. So I'm interested to hear from you what the difference is between optimizing for growth in the short term versus really sticking it out for the long haul.
Yeah. The really important, I guess, realization that you've got to have here is that, and it's the title of the introduction of the book, is the understanding that hustle actually is not a bad thing. I want to clarify that. I'm not a hustle hater at all. Hustle is actually very important. You will hustle quite regularly as an entrepreneur, short periods of time where you've got to sprint a little bit more, right? But hustle is a season, not a lifestyle. And that's something I want to that's why we titled the introduction of the entire book that, because you've got a deadline, you're hustled towards it. There's a project that you want to, finish up. Maybe it's writing a book or launching a show or, I don't know, putting together a new keynote for a big, session that you're presenting somewhere. Like that period of time, maybe you've got to put your foot down on the gas a little bit. Nothing wrong with that at all. But understand that when you've hit that end marker of that project or that hustle season, that then it's time to pull back a bit and to recalibrate and recharge. If the word recharge only associates itself in your mind with your devices, there's something broken there, and you've got to look at that, right? So I think that the big realization for me, and I will say this actually, I don't think I've said this to anybody up to this point. I believe I'm a different person now than when I was when I started writing that book.
Interesting.
Because writing the book became almost like therapy for me. And I have given a copy to probably about a dozen close friends, an ebook version months ago, to kind of get validation from. I wanted some validation, quite frankly, but I also wanted some feedback as well in terms of what were the sticking points for them, because I knew I'd be doing a certain amount of podcasts and interviews and things like that about it. So like, where are the one-liners that really resonate? Can I kind of, hustle is a season, not a lifestyle? Where are the tweetables back in the day, right? And a lot of my friends actually came back and said, you know what? I thought I knew you, but now I really know you. Your willingness to share personal stories, to really kind of, here's a visual for you, open up the kimono.
Nice.
You're welcome, everybody. But like the idea of being like really transparent. And part of the book, actually, there's a 4-step framework that I've got in the book, which is what we call our life OS or life operating system. And the principle behind that was to understand that, well, our phone's got an operating system, our laptop has got an operating system. Why haven't you got an operating system, right? So it was initially only a 3-part, and we were kind of visually showing it as a triangle. And it was all about personal mastery, love and relationships, and then the impactful work that you do. But one thing I kept going back to when I was writing the book was hobbies and pastimes. And then I started deep diving on hobbies a little bit. Where does this come into play when it comes to things like recovery, when it comes to entrepreneurship in general, but just C-suite leaders, executives, all that kind of stuff? And man, once I went down that rabbit hole, I swear, Freddie, it was like a major light bulb moment. I said, I got to include hobbies and pastimes. So it became a 4-step framework, because we did a lot of research for this book. I mean, you look at the the bibliophile at the end of that book, it's pages long. Loads of sources are quoted and all the rest of it. And we saw that, and there was one particular stat that really jumped out at me, that if you engage, well, let me put it to you like this. If I said to you there was a way to increase your productivity as a business owner by as much as 30% in just 2 hours a week, would you be interested?
Definitely.
Right. All you got to do is get a hobby.
Really?
This has been proven. It was a Forbes study, and particularly a creative hobby. So something like painting or gardening or photography, something creative. Executives and entrepreneurs that engage in creative hobbies for a minimum of 2 hours a week do have the ability to be able to produce more and become effectively more productive by up to 30% in their work, which is
That is crazy.
So it's like, well, if that's the case, and we know then also that if you engage in hobbies and pastimes away from work, away from family commitments, and like we're talking about stuff on our own, right? If we do that as well, that actually helps us recover faster from a mental bandwidth perspective as well. So not only are we recovering better, but we're also getting to the point where we're becoming more productive just by stepping away from everything and enjoying some pastimes.
That is wild.
Pretty wild,
That's
right?
the kind of thing.
So I had to include it, plain and simple.
And I'm just looking at the book now, like who's already read it and who's given you some feedback. And some of the names are ridiculous. Lewis Howes, Dan Martell, Donald Miller. Like, these people are incredible who have read it and given such stellar testimonials. So I'm interested.
Checks are in the post, guys.
Yeah. Freddie Pullen on the back, by the way. What's your hobby?
I've got a few.
Okay.
I've got a few. So I think my biggest love when it comes to hobby is being out in nature. That's my most important one. That was actually something that, as part of my kind of burnout recovery in this recent years, my naturopathic doctor said to me, you need to get out into nature for at least an hour a day. I said, well, that's great. I can walk and listen to a podcast. And no, time. No listening to podcasts. You're listening to nature. That's the whole point. The Japanese actually call it, and I might butcher this, so I apologize if there's any Japanese speakers listening in, Shinjin-juko, which means forest bathing. It's a big thing. And so we're talking about walking around in nature, listening to bird song, listening, just breathing in the fresh air, et cetera, et cetera. But that's now spurred on. It was actually my wife, and I kept coming back and saying, I had this great encounter with this squirrel. It just followed me for 10 minutes, this squirrel walking around the forest. Or, I saw this amazing little robin. I sat down this log and this robin sat down, no more than 4 foot away from me. And it was great, and kind of stuck around for a couple of minutes. It was fantastic. And she said to me, well, we've got that old DSLR camera. Why don't you take it with you on your walks and just, take photos, if anything, just to share it with the kids, And so I started doing that. And now I'm the guy that walks around with a big 600mm wildlife photography lens. Totally into it. So nature, wildlife photography, number one. Number two is bonsai. Cool. I practice bonsai, and I have done for about 6 years or so now. So I've got about 40 trees in my personal collection. Some of them are, big 45, 50-year-old Japanese maples. Some of them are just very small little things that I've developed myself. And then lastly is watercolors and sketching. So I used to sketch a lot when I was younger. My father was an architect. So we used to do a lot of urban sketching around London, actually. One of the most visceral memories I've got actually was sitting on the train. I was born and raised in Wimbledon, and I remember sitting on the train coming into Waterloo, going past the Battersea Power Station. Yeah. My father used to track the same dad joke every time he used to go by. He used to say, "Oh, look, son, there's the upside down table." Ha ha, Dad. You know, yeah. But I remember sketching that one day in his architectural office. I used to go with him on a Saturday morning quite often. So I used to do a lot of urban sketching and whatnot as a teen and in my early 20s, and then didn't draw anything, my 20s, 30s and 40s. And in the pandemic, I started drawing and then painting again, initially with urban, but then now more recently, I'm getting into more nature-based. Yeah. So I'm actually doing a British bird series right now that I want to turn into tea towels and coasters and just for fun, a fun thing.
Pause. Sorry, it's me, Freddie, interrupting myself. I just want to point out how well this guest is doing at building trust with you, the audience. They're adding value, they're giving inspiration, and they're hopefully educating you on a few different areas. You see, we're in a trust recession, and becoming a podcast guest is literally the best way to continue to build trust while so many are struggling. We've built a community of incredible entrepreneurs, all becoming the top most in-demand podcast guests in the world. And if you click some of our links below, not only have we got templates to help you become a top guest, we've also got a community that you can join to get yourself to where you want to be. Now back to the episode.
I think that's really interesting because I think someone listening to this who hasn't got a hobby, and I think I'm probably, when you're talking that, I think I'm probably guilty of it because I would say my hobby is fitness. But it doesn't count, does it?
I'm so glad you say that. Yesterday, my friend and mentor, Michael Hyatt, interviewed me for his Double Win show. And we talked about what a hobby is and what a hobby is not. And I said to him that the big thing that I hear from people about hobbies, I ask them, what's your hobby? They say, I go to the gym. Yeah. That's not a hobby, man. No. God has gifted you with this incredible vessel called your body. You should be looking after that. You should be moving. You should be hitting your step count daily and stretching and lifting heavy things on a regular basis and doing all those things, right? And this is from a guy, by the way, who's not a big fan of exercise. Like I do it because I know it's good for me. I used to play basketball when I was younger. That was and that's super fitness level and all the rest of it. But I've never been a big gym rat. I don't lift that many heavy weights, but I do what I do to kind of stay healthy, right? But that's not a hobby. That's just being a good human in my mind. It's looking after your vessel, right? So the quickest way to try and find a hobby is to talk to your friendship group, right? And I'm talking about the 5 or 6 people that you know best. Ideally away from work. Okay, so not the people that you work with or anything like that, but like people who you've grown up with or people that you've become friends with in recent years. Ask them, what's your hobby? And that's how you can start, because you may or may not be of a similar mindset with them when it comes to hobbies. But, just little things like, there was a lady, I was presenting at an event maybe 2 or 3 months ago. And when the subject of hobbies came up, and I've become more passionate about this subject, as you can probably tell, over recent months. But when the subject came up, I said to her, well, what did you used to do that you loved doing that you haven't done for a while? I did not expect this answer, because this lady's probably about 60. And she said, I used to skydive monthly.
Oh, wow. Okay. Monthly.
And I said, okay. I mean, I was well out of left field. Skydiving? Yeah, skydiving. Monthly. When was the last time you did it? Probably about 15 years ago. I said, are you in good health? And she said, oh, yeah, I'm in great health. Then why don't you go skydiving next weekend? And about 2 weeks later, I got a DM from her. And she'd gone skydiving for the first time in 15 years. Completely fell back in love with it. No way. Got a skydiving membership. She's based out of New York. And actually, believe it or not, knows one of my friends who I've known for well over 15 years now. They met at the same skydiving club. So it just goes to show you how serendipitous the world can be as well.
I think it's a great bit of advice to ask your friends. And also, I guess, because if you're friends with them, you probably have similar interests.
Absolutely.
My brother's an architect in Shoreditch, and he's got a million hobbies. But he loves to fill his time with these little creative things he can do. So
your brother has children?
No,
I didn't think
he's
so.
younger. Yeah, he's busy. He's busy.
If you have children, you've got 2 or 3 hobbies max, right? Yeah.
He's got lots of time. He's in central London, isn't he?
Yeah.
So he's got things going on. Chris, I'm interested in your take as the guy who I've seen speaking a lot about personal branding and the way to do it over time, youpreneur. What is the difference, in your opinion, between personal branding and just being a loud personality?
I think somebody is a personal brand when they go into it with the very clear, I guess, plan of attack around monetizing that expertise. You can be a loud personality. You can be an influencer. Like, I've lost count of the number of influencers that have got hundreds of thousands of followers, if not millions of people following them on one platform or another or combined, that I've met in the last 10 years that are making absolutely no money at all.
Yeah, big time.
I've lost count, genuinely. Whereas I know some people who I would be classing as a personal brand entrepreneur who may only have 4,000 or 5,000 followers on Instagram, 5,000 or 6,000 people on their newsletter that are making well over 6 figures a year, very comfortably, with profit margins in the 60, 70%, working 3-4 days a week.
It's leverage.
So it's about going into it with the mindset of, I have a genuine expertise that I can help people with. I've got a solution to people's problems that I can bring to the table. I'm going to charge what I'm worth based on that expertise. I'm going to work with the type of people that I know I can serve best. And I'm going to do it from day one, knowing that I'm going to bring, some level of value, as much as possible, obviously, to all those people. And that's the difference between a personal brand entrepreneur and someone who's just loud and obnoxious on social media. Anyone can bloody dance on TikTok. Yeah. Anyone can do that. Anyone can point, right? But not everybody can genuinely, convert 20 people into a group coaching program.
Yeah, I
Big
agree.
difference.
I agree. And I think you shouldn't be optimizing for fame and for views. You should be looking at, like you say, authority and a way of leveraging something out of your expertise. I'm interested in really how you build something over time. I think this is where the conversation is already, but where I'd love to take it, because I'd love to know from you, what is the biggest misconception when someone's starting a business or they're trying to scale a business and they aren't looking, or they're scared of what the long term looks like? What is the misconception about growing for the long haul?
I think the big misconception about that is that people are too focused on short-term wins. Short-term wins, or quick wins, as I call them, are sexy, right? You can say, I want to sell 100 books this week. And you push and push and push and push, and you sell 100 books. Yay! You kind of celebrate that win, right? Whereas I'd rather sell 10,000 books over the next year, right? So it's a slow burner. It's a much, much, much bigger target in terms of volume of books sold. But I'd rather sell 10,000 books over the next year, slowly but surely, by consistently showing up and providing value in a number of different ways. And I think that's what people have to understand, is that long haul approach to sustainable success is not something that you can just kind of chase down like a quick win. You've got to go into that knowing full well that this is about consistently showing up and providing value. You serve first and sell later. A lot of people are too focused on closing the next deal. And I was in sales for a long time before I became an entrepreneur. I'm a big believer, actually, that, there's all these acronyms in the sales game of, AIDA, attention, interest, decision, action, ABC, always be closing, all this kind of stuff. I'm a big, big believer that the close in the sales cycle comes about actually very naturally. A lot of people say you should always ask for the order, But actually, truly, if you've done everything right in the sales process up to that point, the order should happen all by itself. The close should happen all by itself. So you prospect, you qualify, you build rapport, you gain trust, you handle objections. You do all these things up to the point where it's actually somebody saying, how do I work with you, Chris? What's the next step? This all sounds great. It's not buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff. So you serve first and you sell later. And I think that's the big misconception, is that people think that they can just go after those quick wins and stack them.
Yeah.
But I'd rather just show up more consistently and have that compound interest effect kicking in, where it's like, the analogy I use actually a lot is about making deposits on your bank account. You make deposits and deposits and deposits and deposits, and then eventually you make a nice withdrawal, right? Gary's book, Gary Vaynerchuk's book, Jab, 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 Right Hook. It's all about jab, 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 right hook. So regardless of how you look at it, it's about going into it with the right mentality and being around for a long period of time, because it's the right thing to do.
I love it so much when someone talks about the long term, because I've become obsessed with the word trust that you just mentioned there. And I really think that trust...
Oh, you're done without it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
but people don't care about trust. They just think, like you say, it's about the close. And I think I've just been doing a lot of research into how trust decays. So say we all start with 100% full tank of trust, which obviously we don't. We have to build it up. But if you have 100% full trust with you and I, if I do things over time that don't fulfill that trust, it could be little things. I don't answer your text. I don't talk about your book anywhere. It just decays over time. And it's so hard to build it back up again. But if you then expand that to 40 years, you can see how trust becomes the only thing that's important.
Yep.
Because you can't replenish it quickly.
Yep.
I'm really interested though in, you've written these books. You've been on a lot of podcasts. You speak in keynotes. You speak very well. If that book was pushed off the table, The Long Haul Leader, what's the one piece of advice you would want someone to take away from it if you had to summarize it in 30 seconds?
Self-care. 100% self-care. If you're an entrepreneur and you're not looking after yourself properly, if you're not getting the right sort of sleep, if you're not fueling your body with the right kind of food, if you're not hydrating properly, I've become like a serial peer. I'll pee every hour, right? You've got to hydrate. If you're not, please don't use that in the trailer. If you're not, if you're not looking after yourself first, then whatever value you can bring into the world will be very limited. Life is not an infinite scenario, right? It's a very finite scenario. And because we've only got so many years ahead of us where we can provide value and serve in the right way, we want to make sure that we're at our tip-top shape whenever we possibly can. And this is coming from a guy who was genuinely depressed, anxious a lot of the time, even after all the success and the money and all the rest of it, who actually did get into pure blown adrenal failure. I've been able to get out of it now because I understand the importance of that self-care. So if you really want to be around for a long time, to serve in the right way, to make a whole bunch of money, and to live a really successful entrepreneurial freedom-based lifestyle, you've got to make sure that you put yourself first. And again, it's not selfish. It's a strategy.
And if someone's listening to this and they're inspired by what you've done in your career and what you're speaking about now, but they feel like they can't change, they can't put their health first because either they're in scarcity, they're struggling, or it could just be that they're around people who don't think that looking after themselves is cool. They drink a lot at the weekends, they're going to football games, whatever it might be, whatever stigma it might be. What would you say to that person that is feeling stuck?
There's only one person that's going to get you unstuck, and it's going to be yourself. And if your friends are stunting your growth, or if they are slowing you down towards the mission that you want to go on, whatever dreams you want to chase down, whatever the case may be, they're not real friends. Go get some new friends. I remember my father, I must have been maybe 17 or 18 years old, I think. And he said to me, son, if you can get into your 40s and you can count more than, your really good friends on more than one hand, you are killing it. Like you're crushing life, right? You probably wouldn't use the term crushing because it wasn't a thing back in the 80s or the 90s. But he said, if you can get into your 40s and you've got more than 5 really, really good friends, you're absolutely killing it. Like, you know, and he's so right. I know so many people. I'm blessed to have so many amazing relationships with so many great folks around the world. But I can genuinely say to you, my best friends, the ones that if I really needed them, they would get in the car and drive to my home in the middle of the night or jump on a plane on the other side of the world to be with me. They are on less than one hand. There's 3 or 4 people like that in the whole world. Yeah. And so you don't want, you know, your friendship group is supposed to lift you up. And if your friends are saying, oh, screw your goals, screw the target you've got for this month. Come out, it's Friday night. Let's go out. You know, you got to get some new friends, plain simple.
I think it's really, really important to hear that, because I've been doing a lot of thinking over the last few months on what is happiness. Because for example, as our business grows and it hits different goals, you start to go, oh, well, I thought I'd be happy when I hit that goal or when I bought that or whatever. And you start to realize that actually happiness it's almost something that we shouldn't be looking for. We should almost be looking for peace. But I think that happiness, for me at least, comes down to quality of relationships, which goes to what you're saying there, which is if you've got that group of people that you can rely on, surely that is happiness, and you should be around them as much as possible, and you should benefit from that energy that they have.
100%. And your relationships should be treasured, not used. And unfortunately, in the online business world, relationships do get used. You know, oh, I want to become friends with Freddie because he's got a great podcast. I want to get onto the podcast, talk about my new book. But then when that's finished, you never hear from me ever again. That's not a friend. No. That's not a friend at all. That's just somebody who used you to get on the show to talk about their book. I mean, you know, this is the first time we're meeting in person, but I can already tell that long past this podcast, we're still going to be texting each other, right? So your relationships are like, I can't, if I could put a dollar amount, the dollar amount I would have on my relationships is exactly a gazillion trillion dollars. You know what I mean? Like I mean, you've seen some, you know, you called out some of the names, you know, Lewis, for example, Lewis Howes, he wrote the foreword for my second book.
Oh, did he?
Rise of the Youpreneur. And I knew Lewis long time ago. In fact, actually, I was in the School of Greatness studio before it was the studio. He had the orange lockers up against the wall. And that was it. I was like, well, what's going on in the room? Oh, I'm going to start this video podcast and we're going to call it the School of Greatness and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And, you know, this is in the middle of, this is his apartment in LA. He was making me a banana shake at 9 o'clock in the evening, you know. But I've never asked Lewis for anything, ever. And then when I said, hey, dude, I've got my new book coming out. It's all about personal branding. You're a phenomenal example of a personal brand that's done well. Would you mind writing the foreword? Sure, man. Send me the manuscript. I'll read it and check it out. No brainer.
How cool is it that you actually read it as well?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people wouldn't read the book. They just go, yeah, sure, you can put my name to it.
Oh, I know he read it because he referenced things in the book, in the foreword, right?
Yeah.
Similar situation with this book. And I've always said, like, if you're watching or listening to this now, and yourself as well, have you got a book yet?
I've written one, but it's not released.
Okay, great. So here's some advice for you. Don't add a foreword to that book unless it's genuinely going to add something to the manuscript. So you can write an amazing book, but unless the foreword makes it even more amazing, leave it out. Leave it out. Because unless it adds something of value to it, it's just additional information for your reader to consume. So with this book, when I was pretty much done with the manuscript, I sat down and I said, do I need a foreword for this? And there was only one person on the planet that I was going to reach out to if I felt like I needed it. And I said, you know what? If he's going to add genuine value to it, then it makes total sense for me to ask him. And that was my friend and mentor, Michael Hyatt, who has been asked to do dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of forewords in his 45-odd year career. And when I asked him to do it, he said, well, send me the manuscript. And then I heard nothing for a week. I was like, oh, man, did I screw up? You know, have I kind of stepped over, you know, the relationship thing? I started worrying a little bit about it. And then he replied to my email and he said, sorry for the late reply. I was at the lake house. He's got this beautiful lake house in Nashville. But I read the book and I've taken a stab at the foreword. It's attached. And I was like, holy moly. I read the foreword and I was like, oh man, this is amazing. So we included it in the book.
What a guy.
So it was important.
He not
to
only read
understand
it, he actually read it and wrote the foreword and then replied.
And read it on his own time while he was at his lake house, and then wrote the foreword and came back to me with it. So again, I guess kind of the message here is that your message is good enough unless somebody else's message attached to it can make it even better, even more powerful, even more rewarding, even more valuable. I'm just a big believer of that. And relationships should be about just being there for each other. It's not about what you can get out of those relationships. Yeah, from time to time you'll support each other and things like that's what friends do. But you don't go into a relationship with the mentality of what am I going to get out of this?
I'm interested to get your opinion on this. So it's in relation to the book stuff. So I had a gap between sort of our Euro summer podcast tour and finishing the projects and the sprints on the business. So what I thought I would do in the space of a few weeks is write the book that I'd already planned out and done a couple of chapters, but I thought I'll get it finished. Then over the summer, I can get it edited and I can launch it in September, which is what we'll do, to the podcast listeners as a sort of change in the way that you launch a book. But the reason I did that is because I often, like many of us, feel guilty when I'm not working at 80 to 100% on the business.
Right.
How would you combat that, or what advice would you give to entrepreneurs who are very much feeling guilty if they're not working on the business, or at least leading from the front?
Well, the thing is, you were working on the business in an indirect fashion.
True.
Because writing the book is, I mean, it's probably the number one expert positioning strategy, right? And this is why at Youpreneur, we have our own publishing imprint, Youpreneur Press, because we work with expert authors to publish their book and distribute it and all the rest of it. I'm a big believer of books for business owners. It's not just about creating a manual, a journal, a vessel of your expertise to get it out into the world, but it's equally important from a lead generation perspective as well. So writing a book, you were indirectly working on the growth of your business. It's the growth of your business that you'll see for the next 3, 4, 5 years once that book comes out. If people, though, however, are not working on their business and they're wasting time binging Netflix, and maybe you should feel a little guilty about that. I'm not saying you shouldn't have downtime. I watch a little Netflix every now and then, don't get me wrong, right? But I make sure that all of the work that I've got on my to-do list that day is done first, right? So I think it's a mindset thing more than anything else. If you're really focused on growing a business, it's going to be around for the long haul, so that you can serve the right type of people and obviously create the lifestyle for yourself and your loved ones. If you're really focused on that, you'll get the work done, and then you'll go chill. If you're not so focused, then maybe your priorities are a little mixed up.
Exactly right. Okay, cool. So the way to think about it is you need your downtime, but to look at it as, are you actually working indirectly on the business, or are you just wasting your time?
Right.
Really interesting. Okay, so if I'm looking back at your career, so you've led businesses for 20 years, if not more than 20 years. How do you see yourself changing or developing as a leader for the next 10 or 20?
That's a good question. And if I'm really honest with you, I don't think I have an answer for you. And the reason why I say that is because the world is changing at such a drastic pace. We are more connected than ever before. Yet, unfortunately, we're more disconnected than ever before as a human race. And that worries me a little bit, AI, for all of its positives, also brings about a certain amount of negatives as well, like anything else, right? Do I think AI is going to be the end of the world as we know it? No, of course not. We've had loads of things in the past that could have ended the world, right? And we're still here, aren't we? In a studio in London talking, right? But it's drastically shaking up the landscape of human interaction and connectivity and how we interact with each other, right? More than anything. And also the way that we build and operate our businesses as well, both from a day-to-day perspective as well as obviously a scalability perspective too. So I don't know. What I do know for sure, however, is that I am absolutely going to continue to put my own self-care and self-focus as an individual front and center across everything that I do. That I know for sure. Because as a father, it's my number one role. Number two, as a husband. And number three, as a business owner and a leader within an industry, that I know without having that as my main kind of guiding light, my North Star, so to speak, I'm not going to be much good to anybody. That's for sure. Everything else is open for discussion. You know, how I grow the business, how I market the business, how I convert clients, how I serve clients, all these things, that will always change. But I know for a fact that the number one focus will continue to be me and making sure that I'm around for as long as I can possibly be.
I think people need to hear that so much, because I think someone else has said on the podcast in the last couple of months that the most selfless thing you can do is to be a little bit selfish on yourself.
Yeah.
That you've got to look after yourself so much. You've worked with thousands of founders. You've spoken all over the world. What is the common trait you see between people that burn out and the ones that don't? And I know we've touched on looking after themselves, but is there something else that you see where you're like, you might be on a collision course with burnout versus the ones who might not be?
It's a good question. I think if I could talk from an entrepreneurial perspective, I think the big difference between those that burn out, maybe even a little earlier than they should or would, and by the way, about 78% of entrepreneurs will burn out at some point, give or take. So, and at varying degrees of that burnout as well, right? But I think the big common denominator that I've seen is that people who become incredibly good at delegation and team building as a whole are less likely to burn out hard, right? And, you know, I've had up to almost 500 people working for me before. Now I'm really happy to say I've got like 5 people working for me. One of them is my daughter as well, my second oldest baby, who's now our COO at Upreneur. Very blessed to be able to work with her every single day. It's one of my favorite things to do. But becoming really good at getting stuff off your plate is an incredibly great skill to have from an entrepreneurial perspective, because it does mean that you get to stay in your zone of genius for longer periods of time. So my zone of genius is serving people with my content. It's working with my coaching clients. It's jumping up on stage and strutting myself around like a peacock. It's writing books and that kind of stuff, right? That's my zone of genius. That's the work that I should be doing 99% of the time. What I should not be doing, Freddie, is messing around social media. I should not be messing around inside of Facebook ads, you know, manager or whatever they call it. I don't even know what it's called anymore because I haven't been in there for about 7-8 years, I think, right? I shouldn't be, I shouldn't be putting together monthly reports on our KPIs. That should be my COO or my ops director or my VA. If I'm a one-man game, in a one-man game and I've got just one VA working for me, like there are certain things that you just should not be doing. So become a master delegator.
I think people should be reassured from this conversation that yes, the next 10 years in entrepreneurship are going to be difficult. They're going to be volatile. But if you look after yourself, put yourself first and then work in your zone of genius, you'll probably have a better chance of living out for the long haul, surviving the long haul, than if you were to focus on the short-term wins, trying to follow the trends. Chris, it's been an absolutely fantastic conversation. Can you just tell me when the book is coming out and when people can, where they can find it?
So official launch date in the United States is September 2. And in the UK, it's a couple of weeks later because they're exporting over here. Perfect. So,
and they can find it on your Instagram, on your website.
Instagram at Chris Ducker, website longhaullleader.com, and all the other usual online platforms.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been awesome.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to that episode. I hope you enjoyed it just as much as I enjoyed speaking to that guest. If you scroll down now, you will find a link to our Healthy Hustle newsletter. There's more than 10,000 people receiving the newsletter every week, and it helps break down how to become a top podcast guest. It will also break down exactly what this guest that you've just listened to did to create such a great episode that you've just listened to. I hope it's helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.